welcome Matthew.
Thank you, Kason. How am I sounding here? Is it good? Okay, good. Welcome to you all. Happy Pride. Happy to be with you. And I don't know, when I heard the list of things that I'm doing here, I was like, that's too much Brensilver. It's just, but I am happy to be here, and you be careful what your fill is, So we'll sit and sit, and then I'll offer some reflections, and we'll have some time for dialogue. And yeah, so please settle in. Thank you. And just like we can get into a yoga asana, so a kind of posture, more or less gracefully, we can get into our Dharma posture with more or less force. So the encouragement is just to be gentle in how you assume your Dharma posture, the posture of your heart, mind, body. Maybe you begin with a few breaths that reach deep into your belly, up into your shoulders. Meditation is more an invitation to stop doing things rather than to start them. But we have to trust our mind. We have to trust an awareness that doesn't depend on me, my doing and my control. The sense of self is experienced as tension. It's performative and pressured. Almost like we're performing our meditation for some internal audience. How deeply might that tension release? And so we receive our breath from a place of surrender, relaxation, clarity. Let your breath bring you deeper into your belly. Our breathing can get us up in our heads, but let your breath ground you, help you sit in your bones. The Dharma is, we could say, everywhere. And yet so often we live alienated from it. In our practice, we become alienated from it. But to reconnect, we surrender. can live an entire life with the sense that our life is just out of reach, or it's coming, but not here yet. We can live a whole life with that dislocation, and then our time is up. But we don't have to. To find our life right here. We have to trust that we're strong enough to meet the changingness of all things. The ambivalence and complications of any life. We have to be confident that we can meet the experience of life slipping through our fingers, the undertow of anicca, but yeah, the mind is vast enough for all of this. As we breathe, This kind of openness allows our care, love, to arise without obstruction. So in these last couple minutes, it's possible without strain, just abide in care, kindness, or joy, compassion, the quiet love of equanimity. Okay. It's good to practice with you. Mm. So in psychological research, um, sort of understanding how psychiatric pain arises, like that question, like, okay, how did I become, depressed or anxious or something? There's a long, long history of what we call like monocausal models. So one one cause. I got depressed because bad parenting or a serotonin abnormality, or it was trauma, or it was our troubled culture, or it was what you unconscious conflict, repression. There's one thing, right? And there's been a pretty strong move away from that to something like explanatory pluralism, where it's multiple causal streams, multiple um, influences that create, you know, my, anxiety or whatever it may be. And it's many things interacting in complicated ways. There are risk factors and protective factors. There's difficult environmental experiences. There's genetics. There's a lot of things that are interacting in very complicated ways. And to understand why I'm feel this way, feel depressed or something like this, you have to understand many different causes. And I think the same thing can be said about flourishing, about deep well-being, that thriving is many factors mixing in interesting ways, supporting one another, amplifying one another. And it's not like there's just one way to grow in flourishing. In a certain sense, our dawning freedom is going to look different from one another, depending on the complexity of causal conditions. And in an important sense, it's like I can kind of retrospectively tell a story about how the Dharma has offered what it has, but I kind of feel like I'm making it up a little bit. Like, I don't know what happened. I know 25 years ago I sat down and it was not a good scene, It was like, it was very, very humbling, and somehow I kept going kind of out of, not because I was being rewarded, it was very unrewarding experience. It was not like, it's amazing I kept doing it given how humbling it was, but uh, that was a long time ago. And somehow over all these kind of years, I've been, um, just trying to nurture goodness in one way or another. And, and who knows how it all worked out. And so all of that is a kind of a preface to the topic for the evening, which is, understood in simplistic ways, maybe a two linear map of how freedom unfolds, namely liberative dependent origination. Um, and, and so, this is not the universal law of exactly how things unfold for all minds in all times, in all places, or something like this. But it does give you a sense of some of the kind of causal forces at play in our growing freedom. And the Buddha was much more, it's much more interested in a way in suffering, was like, of course, interested in freedom, but the way freedom is usually defined is just the absence of suffering. And so so people come into the Buddhist scene and they're like, it's pretty depressing, it's like, you're kind of a buzzkill, Brensilver, too, and it's like, I don't know, all this talk about suffering, but I think the Buddha's response would be something like, look, suffering is our only problem. It's our only problem. And the resolution of that problem does not need to be followed by the manufacture of joy and love and care. It's waiting for you, as if all along. And so, of course, suffering, right? And so we have these complex maps of how the Buddha understood suffering to arise. This is like the interest in in a certain kind of scientific interest in causality, right? That's a lot. Science is about understanding causality, right? That's why one does experiments to understand. Well, does this cause that? And the Buddha was very interested in understanding what causes suffering. How do we generate it? How do we stay ensnared in it? Um, and so we get a map of dependent co-origination, dependent co-rising, that sort of maps out the way that suffering congeals in our nervous system. And much less prominent is a map of flourishing, And so the kind of transcendent dependent origination or liberative dependent origination is a vision of freedom unfolding. And it's likened to the way kind of water rolls down a hill, towards the ocean. Um, this is one map, and you'll hear pieces in this that are maybe familiar, pieces that sound remote or something like that. But I think there's a way for you to understand your practice in the context of this map. So the story begins. Faith has a supporting condition, the Buddha says. Faith has a supporting condition. It does not lack a supporting condition. And what is the supporting condition of faith? Suffering should be the reply. So the first factor in liberatory dependent origination is faith. But we got to get to that somehow. And you know how you got here, This meditation is not plan A, like the Dharma is not like plan A, me sitting alone in a room for months. That's not plan A, it's not even plan B, right? And so, but we've all been kind of humbled by the intensity of life and the normal strategies that we use to kind of manipulate it. It's tricky because they work a little, if they didn't work at all, if they didn't get reinforced, we would have given them up. They work a bit. Sometimes they work quite a bit, but they don't really work. And so we need a kind of another way of actually meeting life. And so suffering, it's not always the first kind of launching the bedrock for our practice, but often is. There's often a sense of just like, okay, I'm out of moves here, and in that the kind of first gesture of like of doing something, there's some faith that there may be another way of living. Even before it's like a robust kind of faith, there's some interest in like maybe there's another way of living. And so faith it's not exactly something we do. It's not like this willful gesture of like we decide, okay, now I will have faith. It's a little bit more like a form of falling in love. And we don't decide when or when not to fall in love. That's something that just happens. We do. Love happens. Faith happens. We develop a certain kind of trust that grows and grows in this path. And when we have a kind of a why, when we have a why of our life, Nietzsche said almost any how will do when we have the why. And with faith, we start to have a why of our life. Why do we sit? We know why. And this this quality of faith I associate with relaxation, relaxation. That until there's some, kind of substantial measure of faith, we're sort of compulsively looking around for evidence that we're on the right track, evidence that we're not being conned. And the truth is, there's some part of our mind that imagines it might be getting conned until quite deep into practice. Faith starts to relax some of this. We stop like relentlessly trying to document our progress and where we are on the path. Am I getting better? The big messy project of Matthew, that nauseating project I call me, it's like, it just starts to get a little quieter, a little quieter. And there's a sense of just like, I don't really care where this is going or how I'm doing. I'm just going to keep going because it's like there isn't a plan B really. There's something like necessary about this practice, something necessary about whatever suffering is entailed in it. And so as we relax into faith, there's some joy, gladness, pamoja is the Pali word. And it is perhaps interesting that in this map, joy, delight, it sort of precedes a lot of knowing, it precedes concentration. A lot of the things we want to get in order to be happy. I want to get deep. I want to get concentrated. I want to get insight. I want to get whatever. It's like, I want to get that in order to be happy. And the Buddha is like, no, 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 actually get happy enough. And then those things come more naturally because we're not in this kind of frenzied search of looking. The looking cuts cross purposes with finding. And so we're starting to feel like, okay, this is a path, and I don't remember when that was for me, but there was a sense of just like this dawning kind of like commitment. Like, as a kid, I really I could sense adults didn't know about happiness, and I was raised, I had pretty fortunate conditions, I really lot of privilege, and still I could sense like whatever happiness was, like none of the kind of models proffered by culture were offering anything like what I would hope for. And so it was like, and then I got older and I kind of like, I didn't know if it existed at all. And I wondered, like maybe life just has to be this hard. Maybe there actually is no answer to the intensity of life. And so I didn't actually go looking for the path, but it sort of found me through roommates, just out of college. And after some time, it was like, okay, just the kind of the relief that there is a path, no matter how well I can do on it, there's a path that somehow can make sense of the intensity of my life. And so this the Buddha's observation is echoed by interesting research stuff, whereby like negative affect suffering is not conducive to learning. The like actually the relaxation, the delight of a kind of peaceful, slightly joyous mind is much more receptive to new information. Suffering makes us kind of self-absorbed, and the kind of, the tunnel vision kind of sets in. And it's really some measure of joy that allows us to begin to take in the information from our, like, the peripheral vision of our mind. And so this gladness, the path, it becomes a kind of companion in a way. The Dharma becomes companion, and so when we naturally find ourselves in some joy, first it may start as a kind of like, yeah, just some sort of quiet kind of relief, and then it's said joy is a supporting condition for piti, rapture, and um, both are very pleasant. But in the rapture, the kind of arousal level, both are, there's valence and arousal, valence and arousal. You know, it's like almost, it's been argued that's like a facet of all conscious experience, you know, valence and arousal, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, and arousal. You know, joy and rapture, you know, gladness and rapture, they're both quite pleasant, but the rapture, the arousal level is amped up quite a bit. And it's usually associated with kind of the stillness of the mind, with samadhi, with quiet. But it is it's a kind of, one way it's been discussed is a kind of like intense, you know, rapt interest, rapturous interest. It's hard to meditate sometimes, often. We don't have, it feels like doing a chore or something like this. And in this, there's in a kind of intrinsic interest and motivation of just like, I want to know. The knowing is sufficient. I don't care what is being known. The knowing itself is sufficient. It's feeding my mind. And so there tends to be a kind of strong somatic component with this, a kind of like uplifting sort of, yeah, very, very bright. And it's generally considered, you know, very pleasant, a kind of like motor just running on its own, animating our mind or something. Generally pleasant, but sometimes it gets kind of like mixed in with some of our striving, and it can become unpleasant. And so in these realms where the mind is kind of like very bright, we're also very suggestible, It's a little bit like being on a skating rink, you know, that's wet, and we're wearing very slick shoes. And so it's like you kind of like, where the mind goes, it really goes, right? And so these factors, they sort of make, you know, these piti, samadhi, concentration factors, they make love much more accessible, but they also make hate more accessible, which is, we don't lead with that, you know, but it's like, but that's a feature of this kind of deepening sensitivity and, yeah, kind of potency of the mind, a kind of, you know, frictionlessness of the mind. And so here the mind does get very bright. And this is unfolding not because we want it to, but because we don't really care what happens, you know, just like, and it's hard, we can't pretend like we don't care what happens. We actually have to find ourselves at a juncture in practice where it's like awareness is the priority rather than my so-called life, you know? And that when it's like that, things unfold. And so we're not engineering anything. And this tends to be very rewarding, but even rapturous pleasure grows old, you know, which is like hard to believe, you know, but like rapturous you know, really rapturous pleasure. But actually, the arousal level of it is the only thing that doesn't fatigue the heart is peace. Even love, the most beautiful states, whatever concentration, piti, you know, uh, all of that at some level is a weight on the mind. The level of arousal, even when it's entirely pleasant, you know, there's something subtly fatiguing about that, and the mind longs to turn down the knob of arousal, you know, and the kind of coarseness of piti becomes fatiguing and tranquility follows. This is the kind of our system turning down the knob to something like a more comfortable cruising altitude where the pleasantness is there, but it's a kind of, it's subtler. It may be very pleasant, but the arousal level starts to come down. And tranquility is, you know, it's deep. It's like, it's very wakeful, but it's very tranquil. And insofar as so much of our suffering manifests as a kind of tension, you know, I said something like parroting what a friend of mine said, Carrie Peterson, like the sense of self is experienced as tension. Not all tension is self, but the sense of self is experienced as tension. And that tension like begins to melt in tranquility, right? And so there's a measure, and we'll talk about it, I guess tomorrow. But there's a measure of, you know, where tranquility is moving towards a kind of quieter mode of self, less tension, less self, more self-forgetting, less congealing of the sense of I amness with tranquility. And so, amidst this tranquility, um, this is setting us kind of free from the forces of vigilance and becoming. The Buddha said, bhava tanha, becoming, the sense of like, this moment is a kind of down payment on some future moment. The sense of like, this moment is, I sometimes say like, the present moment is just a canary in the coal mine of the future. You know, the present moment is a canary. It's like this moment is just a test to see whether my life is on the right trajectory. And so with tranquility, we drop out of the game of compulsively predicting the next moment, of interpreting all phenomena in light of what they mean, in light of where they're pointing us, of where our life is going. And so one neuroscientist said, you know, our minds are always on autocomplete, you know, like, you know how like the phones, whatever, it's like, I'll see you, and then it's like tomorrow at dinner, whatever, it's something like that. It knows, right? This is sort of like, generating that. Our minds work the same way, right? And we autocomplete everything. This moment gets auto-completed in a certain way. And so tranquility is about beginning to relax some of this. Just this moment is okay. And this is a kind of quiet pleasure, and it's a pleasure that there are certain pleasures that compound our craving, and certain pleasures that satiate our mind. And this is a kind of pleasure that satiates rather than potentiates our craving. And so, what are we to do when the moment feels like enough, the knowing feels like enough, when there's very little kind of hunger for experience? We settle into stillness. There's nothing else to do. Nothing else to do. There are no other worries and no other preoccupations. It's like, no, just this is enough. And this kind of this is a gesture of surrender, a gesture, maybe always say, of faith, of just trusting the moment, or maybe we say trusting our mind, trusting the path enough to fall into the present moment undefended, without keeping all the ordinary kind of reference points, all the tabs and kind of like post-it notes of our life and our threats and opportunities, pleasant and unpleasant, my preferences and all of it. It's just like, no, we surrender. And we kind of want to make something happen. I definitely for years was like trying to engineer or make concentration happen, make deepening happen, make you know insight happen in all these different ways. But the willfulness is a reiteration of our suffering. That sense of engineering and building and chasing and seeking, it's just like it's an expression of our pain rather than its resolution. And so we come into modes of being where it's like, yeah, I give up, I'm just like letting go. And whatever this moment does to me, I offer my heart up to it. I enter in a kind of undefended way. And so in samadhi, the kind of object of, the object, whether it's the breath or the sense of awareness, whatever it may be, the object is fully satiating for our mind. It's not hungry for other stimulation. And we usually talk about samadhi as the kind of the attention is unified. There's like a spotlight on whatever it is, and then there's no light that escapes the spotlight, and there's no pull or for whatever's off camera, off light, out of the light. It's just that we just become like this incredible fidelity to what is illuminated, and the rest is forgotten. But we might also think about samadhi as the kind of resolution of ambivalence, meaning that ordinarily we're pulled in a million directions by wanting and craving and all these things, by fear, and we're kind of multitasking in each moment. And samadhi is the kind of all the arrows in our heart and mind are pointed in exactly the same direction. We're not split in our desires anymore. We want just one thing, we could say, the breath or whatever it may be. And the resolution of ambivalence is very relieving. We have to live with a deep measure of ambivalence. It's kind of synonymous with the First Noble Truth that there is dukkha. Sometimes I do say, like, I kind of use different words for dukkha, usually suffering or stress or unsatisfactoriness, but we could also say ambivalence, ambivalent, And this is the resolution, just temporary, but the resolution of ambivalence, and that itself feels good. And so we start to perceive that so much of our thinking is just coping, It's just kind of like maybe we say all thinking is coping, and just coping with the intensity of life, with the complications of the project of being a small creature that's very, very, almost totally vulnerable, amidst unimaginably vast forces, right? And so this this kind of gesture of simplification of, okay, I'm not actually, I don't have to don't have to cope anymore. And when our coping, our knowing is suffused with our motivations. The awareness is suffused with our motivations. It's not just like, be aware of your breath or something. It's like, yeah, but the awareness is colonized by our wanting. The awareness is flavored by me, the sense of me. Our knowing is suffused with our wanting. And so part of what the Buddhist path is about is about beginning to drain the knowing of some of the wanting. And what do we notice? What is it like to know when at least the coarse levels of wanting dissolve? And so in practice, we get to explore, like what does our wanting do to the objects of experience, or what ways does it solidify or create the objects of experience? The more craving, the more world. The more craving, the more me. The less craving, the more life. More life. And so Buddhism hazards a kind of hypothesis where the view infused with agitation and wanting distorts the world, distorts phenomena in some way. And so we soften our clinging, our craving, and the view follows. And not as the wanting subsides, we look, what do we see now? What is our life now? Yatta Bhutta Jnana Dasana, knowledge and vision of things as they are. And I've read too much philosophy to think that our Buddhist practice gives us access, some unmediated access to capital T truth, and we're just like the only ones in San Diego onto it, or something like that. This room should be more full, or, like, no, it's not that. It's not that. It's, but, it like, this knowing may not lead us to some like grand metaphysical truths, but it does lead to less suffering. And so in the kind of penumbra of stillness and samadhi and tranquility, we explore, we refine our philosophy of happiness. And yeah, in these moments, there's like, okay, nowhere to go but the heart, and the experience of the three characteristics: dukkha, anicca, anatta, suffering, impermanence or unreliability, uncertainty, maybe is a good rendering of anicca, and anatta, not self, centerlessness of being, ownerlessness of being. That becomes so blaring. It's like, okay, the Buddha was not joking, and and the sense of like, yeah, nothing will ever be owned. No experience will quench our thirst, and there are no alternatives to letting go. The world is being, there are no alternatives to letting go. And so we become disenchanted with samsara, this realm of cyclical suffering, disenchanted, which is not a kind of nihilism or rejection, but it's like, okay, I'm really, really not going looking for happiness in all the familiar places. And so the kind of cycle of craving, acquisition, reward, and then disappointment, that starts to drop away, and dispassion grows. The kind of churning out of narratives and needs and preferences, that stops. The experience, in a sense, is no longer kind of stimulating chitta, heart, mind. And before it was, it was pleasant and unpleasant, and now everything tastes the same, tasteless, empty. And it tends to be very, kind of like pervasively neutral Vedana, pervasively neutral, not always, but pervasively neutral, like, okay, in ordinary experience, there's very little that's neutral. Everything tastes like pleasant or unpleasant, almost everything. Here it's like, oh no, we're in a mode of very deep neutrality. And this is a zone where, I don't know, but my guess is like if you did neuroimaging on some of this and dissociation, there would be some overlap, There's like, there's a way in which some of this can break in the pathological direction of really very disconnected in a way that we find very alienating or something. And that's not a sign that somebody's doing something wrong, but they kind of move people into a kind of more, it's sort of like kind of the wholesome side of emptiness, and the kind of the churning of sankhara, volitional formation, formative energies. One of my teachers, Ajahn Sucitto, called them formative energies. It's like almost like forming your world of experience that stops, that ceases. This is kind of like the ultimate moment of non-doing. And the engine kind of shuts off. And I didn't know there was like a diesel truck like running since birth. And we've just acclimatized to it in our own, it's like running in our head. And then the engine shuts off. And I don't know about you, but I got in trouble one time saying this with the union leader of the trucking union. Was like when it's just like, no, you're not hearing it the right way, man. But when a diesel engine is rumbling and then the engine cuts off, and so this is a kind of relinquishment and in the kind of the in the shadow of that release there tends to be very deep kind of fulfillment, peace, and we come to know what's been shed, what's been put down, but also the humility of realizing what we still hold to, the ways in which we still cling, the kind of almost endlessly humbling nature of this path. And we become, in a sense, more reverential about the depth of clinging rather than less, more humbled by just how deep those roots run. But we do know what it's like to let go at a deep level. And there's a kind of poignancy in looking back and reflecting on all the suffering that seemed so absolutely necessary. And then in a moment, it seems like, well, yeah, I guess in a sense, it had to be that way. It had to be that way. But now I know something a little different. Now I know um, that at least a big chunk of that suffering felt necessary, but isn't anymore. So now I don't need to cope in that way with life. So, yeah, path unfolds, and then we keep going, keep going back to the beginning and deepening. So I offer that for your consideration, and yeah, pick up whatever's useful and leave the rest behind. Okay. Um, so we have a couple minutes if there are any um, any questions. It's not a great talk for follow-up questions, but you came, I just anyway. No, so it can be questions about whatever, anything that was evoked by the talk or the meditation or just things you're working with. The invitation is just for you to attune to whatever matters to you and ask from there. And that's actually, I depend on you quite deeply, because if you don't care about the question, my answer is going to be kind of shitty, basically. Like, it just can't respond to it. But if you have something on your heart, it's open. Yeah. And I'll repeat it into the mic. Make this simple, Albie. Yeah. Oh, wait, we're running a mic. Okay, I take that back. Yeah. Yeah. I'm not you. Oh. I'm going to get cut. And now it's you. Okay.
Okay, press that button, Albie, so it goes green. Just hold it for a while.
Green, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, well, I mean, that was a very deep talk as far as I'm concerned. And for me, riddled with feeling like, oh, I'm never going to get there. Or, okay, I'm very relaxed and that's okay. And, the whole Megillah. But I'm really curious as to why you started this week with that talk.
Mm. Am I on?
Yeah, you're
okay. So why did I start this week with that talk? I don't know. I don't have like a coherent pedagogical approach or something. But I was not to make you feel badly about your meditation practice. This these zones, it's like I remember something, Shinzen Young said. I forget what he was talking about, but at the end of it he just said, during a 2-week retreat, I remember he said, like, okay, I've now given you an entirely new way to suffer, and he was right, and I followed directions, but like, you want to recognize that certain kind of teachings are going to be more provocative for the sense of self, and wherever we are identified, we will suffer. As a Buddhist, as deep as this, as that, as not deep, like, to the extent that the mind fixates and there's craving or aversion to that element of the self story, you will suffer. And so that whole mode of comparing, like, where am I? When am I going to get there? It's just like born of pain and returns to pain. And it's, just the whole, that the Buddha just said, we gotta step out of it entirely. And that doesn't mean there can't be some aspiration or something like that, but that aspiration is somehow not just like the PR campaign of ego or something like that. And so, yeah, we want to pay attention to how teachings land in our heart, because the ego will get rattled by a lot of what the Buddha said, and we just want to, effectively, like, use that as a way of really, like, understanding of shining a light on the kind of stories we keep humming to ourselves about me, and so, and it's not, it's this, that sense of, like, the self is displaced, the self is somehow in this state of deprivation, and it's just about getting to this other place. Like, it's not the self that goes to that other place. It's not that self that that makes the progress or receives it, It's like, it's different. It's different than that, right? And so, okay, yeah, let me just let me practice, kind of practice with it, and you pick up what feels actually inspiring and not what feels dispiriting or something like that, and yeah, and I feel like, part of Dharma talks, it's part of them are not meant to be understood, you know? It's like, it's not like an informational exchange, where it's like, I want 100% clarity or something like that. Part of them is just like, no, to let the places where we feel mystified animate some of our aspiration or something like that. And mostly we just keep going, we just, like, and if I say anything that kind of, like, props up some interest or curiosity or something like that, then that's good. That's good. That's the point of this thing, Okay. All right. Thanks. Yeah. Maybe one more. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your talk. There was a lot there that sparked my curiosity. Absolutely. I have a couple questions. I'm trying to think of the best one. So I think, as we move along through our own path and gain benefit and different ways of looking at things and becoming just kind of lighter in our experience in the world, we still have loved ones around us that are maybe suffering in ways that we wish we could help. And we don't have a lot. You don't want to sound preachy, right? It's just not really like a way to kind of share an experience that you've been kind of going through for years and years, right, in your practice. Do you have any suggestions for like setting a tone or a phrase or something to pique someone's curiosity, I guess would be the best way, for somebody who might be kind of carrying things and, personalizing and everything's so serious and the sense of self is so large. What do you think?
Yeah. I appreciate that. So I mean, the first piece is just to appreciate just how evocative it is to see someone we love suffer, and to see and sense that some big portion of that suffering might fall away, and yet we don't engineer the redemption of other beings, And so we want to be careful that the spirit of evangelism isn't arising out of our own intolerance of their suffering, And so we want to okay, what's the difference between the intolerance of their suffering and compassion? And that's a deep one with people we love, because when the closest people to us suffer, it presses such deep buttons, and it's not just compassion, it's also a certain kind of desperation, it's like, I've tried to make sense of it for me, because it's like, what is it about the suffering of loved ones that can spin me and my compassion? It's really the intolerance of their suffering that masquerades as compassion, It's like, but growing up as a kid, the suffering of a parent or caretaker or something, that was not a cause for compassion. That was like an existential threat, to see their fallibility, to see that, oh my God, they suffer. They are not governing this world, It's like, and so it almost feels like an echo of that early imprinting where it's like their suffering just spins me, even if it's not big. And when it's big, it's really intense. And so the first piece is to bringing some measure of equanimity, to like equanimity, which I sometimes have described as like love in the face of helplessness. Like, can I actually equanimize? Can my heart rest on the other side of my power? And until we have some measure of that, our compassion is going to be kind of very entangled with clinging and control and all of that. So we got to purify the nature of our compassion. And then we are going to be more attuned in the medicine we offer. And sometimes it may be Dharma, and sometimes it's not, and we want to be sure that are kind of, that it's a kind of, a lot of times it's a kind of quiet, very quiet form of evangelism, where somebody sees us change over time. And whenever you see somebody actually change even if it's just a little bit, but at a deep level, it's very evocative, and people want to know, like, what was that, And everyone knows that they got to do it, but they're afraid, or they don't think they can, or whatever. And so when they see it, it's evocative. And then we try to offer, help that reflects a very careful kind of topographical map of both their strength and goodness, but also their defensiveness. And so we got to the medicine needs to kind of accommodate the sort of, the fragility of ego too, and you can't give more medicine than somebody's system can handle, and so it's got to be like that has to be accommodated in that. And then you see, okay, how can I be useful? Where can I be engaged and compassionate? Where is there just a measure of equanimity and kind of relinquishing a certain kind of control? And then when I see that, okay, well maybe I got to grieve, like maybe I got to grieve. Maybe that's the end of this story, is me actually grieving, and there's a lot for sure to grieve for in those realms. So, okay. All right. Thanks, folks. So we're over time, but so don't need to change posture or anything. Don't need to close your eyes. Just take a breath and sense into whatever goodness you feel here in the room. May that goodness resonate. It is already resonating with your own goodness. And may this goodness overflow from our own heart into the lives of those we encounter. So we vow, may my life, in dramatic or very subtle ways, may it be a kind of quiet blessing for those I meet. Okay. Thank you. Thank you all. I wish you, good evening. Thanks for your practice. Okay.